theme. Everyone's presenting on 3 different topics. There is Josh talking on Docker, Devin giving a presentation on, remind me? Gulp.
For translation files and right to left.
Oh, cool. That's great. And there is, I'm talking on WooCommerce Extensions 101. Tonight's sponsored by Community, this great space, pizza and beer by my company Trestian, web development, all that good stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to give the stage over to Josh. There we go. Plug in here.
Hello everyone, my name is Josh. I think I know most of you for those. We are a we really care about the brand experience at Grizzly, and I myself and a couple of other guys here write code and do the technical aspects of brand experience. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about in the company, I love to see what everyone's doing and how you think you can contribute to the community, and also we love just working with other people. So today I'm going to talk about Docker. What is it? Why would you use it? And how can it make WordPress better? Before we can answer any of these questions, though, we really need to see where we and why Docker even exists in the first place. So it used to be that we would write our PHP code in WordPress, and the server side is just sort of this black box. We might spin up a DigitalOcean droplet, or we might have shared hosting, but we really don't think intently about what's happening on the server when we're writing our front-end code. Because what's actually going on is we have a full LAMP stack running, right? We have PHP, Apache, MySQL, Linux. And each one of those dependencies has a version and dependencies within those dependencies. And there's no way to assure that this environment is going to be the same everywhere you go. And not only that, but you may not even be running just one server. You're most likely going to have 3 or more, right? Staging, local staging, and prod. And each of those servers has dependencies. Typically, you'll spin up new servers the same way, so they will have the same versions. But you may not be in control of prod, for example. That might be a client server, and you might be running Jesse instead of Ubuntu 14.04, and there's no way that you can for sure control that in any given situation, in every given situation. So we write our code on local, we deploy it to staging, everything works great. But then prod, right? So this doesn't always happen, but maybe you get a database error, maybe you get PHP error, and you spend time debugging. And it takes us away from the actual code that we want to write, and it becomes very, very frustrating. A frustrating part of the development and deployment process. So how do we resolve this? Well, configuration management actually is a great way to solve this, because now we can write one file that sits on our server, or sits in our code base, that we can deploy on any server, that keeps track of all of our configuration, and we can spin up new servers, new virtual machines in any environment, and guarantee that they're going to work. And usually this is done with virtual machines, but the problem there is that virtual machines are really expensive on the memory, on the CPU, and everything is sort of isolated in their own guest operating system. What we need is something that's lightweight, that shares the OS kernel, but runs separate, self-contained operating system stacks. We need the stacks to be separate and be able to communicate with each other. So meet the container. So a container does just that. It allows us to, let's say, run a busy one container, a Debian build on another, full operating system, full network stack, all the dependencies we need in each container, and each container also has its own file system as well. And that all runs on one shared kernel. You'll see here that the containers are built from images. So what's an image? Well, an image is similar to, the way I like to think of an image is when you go to create a droplet on digital, there's that. I'm sure most of us use it on a regular basis. You can choose an image, right? You can choose your Ubuntu 14.04 build. Maybe you have your own image that you create for this function and use that to spin up these servers. Well, it's the same thing in Docker. We create an image with all our configuration in it, and then we run that image inside a container. Those ports in Docker, because in the container, since it has its own network stack, it might be running on port 80, but that's port 80 inside the container. So we then have to expose a port outside of the container to be able to access that specific container. And what about our code? Well, if we're writing code locally, we have to have a way to inside the container, and that's where a volume comes into play. So volumes allow us to mount local directories from our host into the container, into any directory we want inside the container. Similar to GitHub, Docker has their own hub, Docker Hub, and this is where we keep all of our images. We're able to create images on the fly and push them and pull them just like in Git. And we're able to pull other images from other companies and other developers and use that code in our own projects. So in Docker, the way this would work is we would pull an image down to our host environment. It would spin up a container in the host environment and start running. And it's highly scalable because you can do this on any environment. And as long as the Docker engine's running, it's guaranteed to work. So you can see that scalability increases when we do this. This gets even more powerful when you have a CI tool, like let's say Travis CI. You can trigger on a Git push a Docker build, right? And it would build all of your server configuration, update any changes, and then run that container inside your server. So, I mean, most of us are in Git anyway, and that's kind of where we work from and where we do all of our code changes. So that process can actually be integrated in your continuous integration and deploy for you. So let's take a look at what Docker actually looks like via the command line. So Docker run is the command to run a container. Then you specify what image you'd like, and it's going to pull the image down from Docker Hub. So I can say Docker run, let's say I'm going to do an Alpine build. So Alpine is a really, really small Linux distribution. It's like 5 megabytes in size, so it's really great for containers because you keep your containers really lightweight. And inside Alpine, I want to do ping. So I'm just going to run a ping command inside of this Alpine container. So I'm no longer in my host environment. I'm going into Alpine, and I'm going to ping I'm going to ping localhost. Let's say 5 times. And so what you'll see here is that I don't have the image installed, so it's going to download from Docker Hub. It's going to do my ping 5 times, and then it's going to exit the container. So let's take it a step further, and let's go ahead and do Docker run again. Well, let's say I want to get command line access to this container. I don't just want to run it in the background. I want to actually, or in the foreground, I just want to get shell access to this container. I can say Docker run -it, so IT says give me the command line to this container. And I'm going to run Devin this time. And I'm going to use bash in this instance. So I'm basically just starting up a bash shell inside of Debian on my local machine. And keep in mind, I haven't downloaded or done any configuration to my local environment other than install Docker. Right? So this is really great because you can destroy containers if you don't need them, and it's not messing with your local configuration. So there I am. There's a full Debian OS right inside this container. And I can prove that by running like an apt-get, just so you can see there's my Debian build. So how does this work with WordPress? I'm going to exit. So if we pull up the documentation for WordPress, we can see there are several images that we can pull from. I'm going to stick with the latest, and I'm also going to run Apache. So I'm going to use that image. And I also see a command to actually run this container. It looks like what we have to do is link MySQL database. So linking containers is how you start having multiple containers interact with each other. So let's first spin up a MySQL database, and then we'll link this container. So again, I'm going to do a Docker run to run a container, and this time I'm going to run. I'm going to give this container a name. I'm going to call it just MyDB. You can name it whatever you want. And then I'm going to run it in the background. So I'm going to throw in a -d flag, and the documentation goes over all the different options for this. And I'm also going to need to expose a port. I'm sorry, I don't need to expose a port, but if I wanted to, I could do a -p to expose a port to the outside of the container, but I don't necessarily need to do that for this demo. What I do have to do is pass an environment variable. And when I do that, it's going to set up the password inside the MySQL database. So the environment variable here, straight from the documentation, is MySQL root password. And I'm just going to call it WP, keep it simple. And I'm also going to, I think we're pretty much ready to run this at this point. So I'm going to run actually MariaDB. That's my preferred database. And I'm going to run specifically 10.1.17. So this tag specifies which version of MariaDB. And I should be good to go. So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see how fast it happened because I already have MariaDB that I use for a different project. So it's actually able to spin up that image really, really quickly because it doesn't have to download the image from the repository. Here, PS, I can see that we now have MariaDB running on port 3306 inside the container. So now we're ready to actually link our WordPress install to this container. So I can say Docker run. I'm going to run it in the background again. I'm going to call it MyWP. And I'm going to pass in the WordPress environment variable that links to the database with that password. So let's say WordPress DB password. And again, this is straight from the documentation. Right here shows you all the different environment variables you have access to. And that's going to be WP. And I'm going to actually go ahead and expose a port here. So I'm going to just say 8080 on my local host is going to map to port 80 inside that Apache container with WordPress running on it. And lastly, I'll just say WordPress version 4.6.1 on Apache. So let's go ahead and try to run this. So it doesn't have that version. But you'll see that since I had 4.6.0 installed, it says already exists. So I don't have to go through that entire process of downloading every single dependency all over again. It's caching these for me as I go. So now if I say Docker PS, I have this WordPress instance running on 8080, which is mapped to Actually, it isn't mapped, so I forgot to actually map it. So let's do a Docker stop on this container and remove it. And I'm going to run that command again, but we actually need to link this to our database. So right here, I'm going to do link, and I'm going to link it to my MyDB. That's the name I gave the other container for the database. I'm going to link that to MySQL. This is called an alias. It's just what the developers of the MariaDB image called where you map your image to, where you link it to. So now if I run it, again, it happens almost instantly. I have this running on 8080 and it's linked to this MariaDB instance. So if I go to localhost 8080, there's my WordPress install, ready to go. Now, obviously, we don't want to have to type all these commands in every single time we want to spin something up. The goal is to make this really easy and not like make your head explode every single time you want to spin up containers. And if you're using a microservice architecture like this, where you're using like smaller containers that run different processes, you need a way to manage that, because you're going to spin your head around trying to type in a command like this every single time you want to run a container. So Docker has a solution for that called Docker Compose. And actually, if we look in the documentation for the WordPress Docker container, you can see that they have an example compose file. So I've gone ahead and copied this in to a project here called Docker Demo. And let's just start with it. This is the same Docker Compose file. It's a YAML file that just sets all your configuration. So again, we're keeping that configuration management that we loved about VMs, and that we loved about all of the different best practices around that. So what's actually happening here is we're specifying two different images, a WordPress image and a MySQL image. We're telling, a MySQL container and a WordPress container. We're specifying which image we want to use for each container. We're exposing the ports just like we did before. We're linking. So here I'm linking from WordPress to MySQL. And I'm setting those environment variables for the password to the database. And then I'm going one extra step here, which is specifying a volume. So the cool thing about Docker, like I said, is you can be working on your local machine, but actually mount the volume inside the container. So what I'm saying here is in the root directory of my local, map a WP content folder to WP content inside of the container where the file is being served up. And I'm doing the same here with MySQL. So I can say, hey, MySQL, hey, Docker, let's build a folder here on MySQL and map it to the MySQL folder inside this MariaDB container. So once I have that configured, that file just sits in my code base, and all I have to do is run Docker Compose up. And it's going to start those two containers in the foreground, and you can see that I already have content coming in from that container. So it's building my MySQL database. My plugins and themes are starting to roll in. And if I double check, looks like we're still waiting on a database connection. There we go. So we have a database connection here. So now I'm going on port 8081 for this container. So let's do that. There's my WordPress install. And all I had to do is write that one configuration file, and I can spin up as many of these containers as I want. I can start and stop them. It's not affecting my local environment whatsoever. I can push this, I can make an image and push it up to Docker Hub and then deploy that to anywhere I want. Pretty sweet. So why use Docker? Really, for myself and the others that use this, it's the speed of development in terms of being able to start up a local environment super quickly and knowing that it's going to guarantee work on any other environment. As long as you're running the Docker engine, this thing is going to work. Furthermore, use it with your continuous integration, like Travis CI or other tools that you might be using, to start and stop these images once you have code changes. So essentially, you're not worrying so much about the server side, and you can scale as big as you want with tools like Docker Machine and Docker Swarm. Docker Swarm allows you to create multiple instances of builds and like load balance them. So this can scale really, really well. And just teamwork. If I have a teammate that's coming and joining the team, and I have a really complicated local environment, that's more time that's going to take to help that person get set up with that environment and understand what's going on. So from a teamwork perspective, I can have a teammate come in and start up right away with Docker and have the same exact local environment that I have. And we know that the code's going to work in both locations. So thank you very much. What questions do you have? Yeah.
You said that the Docker going to prod is really easily done, but I still don't get wrap my head around that. How would we change the prod from not being a nightmare or something?
Great question. So when I say that it's easy, I mean that as long as you can run a Docker engine on the prod server, all you have to do from that server is run Docker pull and whatever the name of your image is, and it's going to fully image that server inside a container. So it doesn't matter what version of Linux or what distribution it's running on that server or what like external dependencies it has. It's going to run everything inside of a container, sort of like away from all of the other crap that might be on that server. And I can then use a continuous integration tool to say, do this automatically when I push to GitHub. So when I say it's easy, I just mean it makes sure that it's going to run on that prod environment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Matt.
So to expand on his question a little bit more, so in your example, you have a container for the site files with PHP stuff, a container for the database. Are those then, you create an image with both of those containers in it? Is that how that works? And then you push that up to Docker Hub?
So each container is its own image,
Okay.
and then you're using Docker Compose and Docker Compose up to start it. So what I did in that last example is called microservice architecture. That means you're running like MariaDB on one container and WordPress on another container, and maybe you have other things that you're running. But if you just want to make one giant image, you can totally do that. But the way I would deploy it in a microservice architecture is I would have probably a shell script sitting on the server that says run Docker Compose up as soon as you get like a post receive hook or something like that. So yeah, you would be using Docker Compose up at that point. It would pull the images down and then spin those containers up for you.
So you could take it and you could create a custom image with custom data in the database, custom WordPress files, and store that on Docker Hub, just like you would store files.
Yeah, so you would push, like in that example, I would push my database image up and my WordPress image up, and then I would have those available to pull down on any environment. And then they link together with Docker Compose. Other questions? No.
So say you have a very existing application and you want to take that one. So you're purchasing data to their volumes, right? But let's say production environment, let's say their volumes, and those data will be staying there. You do Docker Compose up and new things comes in, new images.
Yeah.
Any problem with the files and file structure because of the new changes or things?
That's an excellent question. The way you get around that, if I understand the question correctly, is you would mount your host directory as read-only. So you wouldn't allow things to flow both ways, or you would mount your container directory as read-only. So the way by default it works is it kind of merges everything together, but you can set certain things as read-only. as needed. But yeah, in my experience doing this, the only time I've had to really do that is when I was taking like an older project and turning it into a Docker project. But if you're starting these up from scratch, it's really easy to get going. In fact, what I would do for like a database, let's say, is just simply export the database and then re-import it into the Docker version. Yeah.
Have you used Pressmatic before?
I have not. No.
So it's got a couple cool features that I'm wondering are if they're possible with this setup. One being the ability to switch PHP versions on the fly. Like you just click a button and then you go from PHP 7 to 5.2.
Yeah.
And how easy was that with this, or would you have to write a custom shell script or something like that?
What you can do at that point is because you're only working on files in like certain directories and you're only mounting those certain directories inside the container, you would just spin up a PHP 7 container and mount those same volumes. And all it's doing is like taking that same code and going into the new container. So it's a different mindset a little bit because you're not like thinking of everything together. It's separation of concerns. You're like, here's my PHP container that's running PHP 5.6. It's just referencing these files locally. But now I'm going to switch to this PHP 7 container and run the same files locally. And if I have issues, I can look at my code here and see what's going on.
So it sounds like it is relatively simple to do that.
Yeah, it would be pretty simple.
Second thing I really like is ability to have like self-signed certificates. So like for instance, our Guez site runs on HTTPS, and I want to run it locally under HTTPS under virtual host. And so, you know, the annoying red lock on Chrome really bugs me. I want to make sure that like if there's any images or anything that are insecure on a blog post or something, that I can catch that even when I'm on my local machine. So is something like that possible too?
It is possible, but I can say that I don't have a lot of experience doing that. But I have come across a few blog posts talking about SSL and self-signed certificates in Docker. The cool thing about Docker is it's got a pretty big community going. Not as big as WordPress, but
right.
It's starting, like in the DevOps world, it's really big. So I'm sure it's possible. I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, I remember using VVV for a long time, and I went on a quest for a couple hours to try to do it, and lots of Googling and frustration later, I was unable to. So, and this thing comes out a couple months ago, and it's like, here's a button, you click it, and it's like,
yeah. Is
it really that easy?
Yeah. Cool. All right. All right, well, thank you so much. Also, one last thing, if you are interested in learning this, Docker, just Google Docker self-paced training. And there's some really great videos that are free that you can watch, and it'll walk you through the whole thing.
What's up, guys? Hey, man.
Is this your first AWP this year? Oh, actually, you were at the Guez one. That is okay. Good, good. Cool. Well, I just want to share with you a couple things that, since we're talking about WooCommerce, who's built a WooCommerce plugin or who's built a site with WooCommerce? Lots of people. Great. And it's super popular. Like when I was building my add-on called Quick Checkout, you know, I Googled a lot, I wrote a lot of blog posts about things I found out, and you know, I learned a lot in the process. And if you guys ever want like evergreen blog posts, write about WooCommerce, because everybody searches everything about WooCommerce. I haven't written for a couple of years, and people say they find my articles online still. So might be something good there. But anyway, so when I'm internationalizing my plugin, I like to automate what's called POT file generation. That's basically what translators use to take your language, English, for instance, and translate it into a language like Japanese or any other language that is not the native language of the plugin. Typically, it's an English file that's generated, but there are others. I think Contact Form 7 was originally developed in Japanese, but that's just one example of what I like to automate. Another thing is right to left compatibility. So a lot of different languages read from right to left. I think Hebrew being one of them. And if you want your plugin to be adopted around the globe, which I think we all do if it's a commercial plugin, it's really annoying for these folks to read from left to right. And if they're in WordPress and it's already set to right to left mode, seeing your plugin and on the front end and on the back end not being compatible with that really annoys those folks, and they most likely will not use it. And when they go to their meetups, they're not going to recommend it, things like that. So, if you're just doing an MVP something, that's fine. You don't need a compatibility to like just release it. But when, it's getting more popular down the line, you want to definitely look into that. So that's kind of what I experienced with Give, and really we made that an important thing. And on top of this, I'm not talking about it today, but also accessibility for screen readers and folks that are handicapped. So there's 3 different components to really being accepted or being widely adopted when your plugin kind of starts gaining popularity. But first, I have a couple of announcements. Who heard that Managed WP was acquired by GoDaddy? A couple people. Who uses Managed WP? I know Yaron, you do. Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically, does everybody know what Managed WP is? It's probably the leading, what would you call it? A WordPress management platform. So like you have 80 different WordPress installs you're managing. You want to update them all to WordPress 4.6.1, which just came out. Of course, that automatically updates, but you can still track it in this platform. You can also do so many other things like backups for all your sites. You can, I don't know, there's so many different modules on it. Yaron, do you want to say some of the things you like real quick about it?
I mean, for me, the best thing is being able to update my plugins all at once. And if I want to do it all at once, I can do that. If I want to do it site by site, if I want to do it plugin by plugin. So, I know WooCommerce is dangerous to update, so I'm not going to update that in bulk. But if I see Akismet has an update, I can say, hey, update all my Akismet. Its backup system is great too because it lets you keep a certain number of your backups. So if you are using S3, for example, and you don't want to have a bunch, I'll have a daily backup, a weekly backup, and a monthly backup. And I'll say the daily one to keep, run every day and only keep 7 of them. The monthly backup run every month and only keep 6 of them. The weekly backup run every week and keep 4 or whatever. Point being, you'll make sure that you always have a relatively fresh backup. So it has controls like that. And they just keep on adding features to it. Really, really great support. I've been swearing by it.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the CEO of this company, well, I guess he's not CEO anymore, but his name is Vladimir. He was in San Diego, and we had a little get-together similar to how we did with Yoast, except for it wasn't quite as large. But he's a good guy, and they didn't disclose how much they were purchased for, but I think it's a really smart investment by GoDaddy. They're really trying to kind of build this into their GoDaddy Pro managed WordPress solution. So I'm not sure how that's going to work in the end, but they've got a lot of cool things going over there. And to hear that they bought this is interesting. I think, on our AWP forum on Facebook, Brian Cosgard posted the announcement. And just sometimes when people hear GoDaddy, they just have like this really bad experience in mind. We had to close the comments on that thread because it was getting nasty.
It was really depressing. It was a great company that worked hard and got a great acquisition, and everybody was like, "Oh, I'm never using this again." It was bad.
Yeah. One of the competitors, which is a self-hosted option, this is a SaaS platform. is called Infinite WP, and there's a couple others. One I think is called Main WP, but I wonder if they're getting an uptick because of that. I doubt it, but yeah, so that's an interesting.
Yeah, people are more likely to complain than they are to do anything.
I know.
I wouldn't worry about it.
So you have to install a satellite plugin on each
Yeah,
install,
you
right?
install a plugin and then you add it to that.
So technically, you'd have to go into each site and uninstall the plugin, right?
Actually, when you remove it from the dashboard, it will go and delete the plugin for you.
Oh, so you do actually in Manage WP, you can uninstall
Yeah.
that specific one.
Yeah,
Just
you just say right-click, remove site, and it says, do you want us to delete the plugin too? And it's, please.
That's nice.
Yeah, real smart.
Another thing is WordPress 4.6 was released since our last meetup, and now we're on 4.6.1 actually. So some cool things in it. Has anybody been using any of the new classes? Or I think the link utility is a little different when you're linking in the post editor. Kind of neat.
I only just installed it because I was waiting for the minor release.
Yeah.
I always do
I
that.
bet.
There's like 15 different bugs fixed in 0.1.
Some security bugs too.
Yeah.
So update to 4.6.1 if you haven't. And then finally, WordCamp Los Angeles is coming up this weekend. Is anybody going to that? Nobody? Somebody's got to go. No?
I didn't try to.
Oh, well, that's too bad.
Did you make it on camera?
Yeah. Matt, he's going to be here in a little bit. He's going. He's actually speaking, and we're sponsoring. So, hey, I get to go to the dinner tomorrow night. So, and don't have to speak. But it's always a good one. So if you don't have anything going on, come on up. Our communities are pretty close, San Diego and LA. So, with that, does anybody else have any cool announcements or things that they've seen? Jim, anything cool in security?
Covered it. I mean, in the security universe, same old thing, you know, overinflation of all the bad things that are happening with WordPress. You know,
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest problems with WordPress, is there's a lot of people out there who are promoting their businesses. So when you take a look at companies like WordFence and iThemes and miscellaneous, you just kind of take it with a grain of salt. Don't get too freaky about it. Keep your stuff regularly updated is the way to go. Don't get sucked into the mania.
Yeah. One interesting thing I saw is like a vulnerability with using target blank in operations.
Yeah.
Did you see that? How you could basically link on like Instagram to a phishing site, which is like basically on your server that looks like Bank of America or something, and like capture people's information. It's like the oldest trick in the book, but yeah, I know. It seems like the only one that's patched it is what, like Instagram or something like that. But that's just an interesting, social hack thing, I think. Okay, so who uses Gulp versus Grunt? Anybody use both? Yeah? Grunt? Yeah. Okay, so internationalization. I mean, before I started using Gulp and Grunt really automated, I was using PoEdit. Every time I wanted to release a version, I had to open up PoEdit and like click several buttons to like actually navigate to the directory and then fill in several options. And by the way, it wasn't free. And it didn't really generate the most efficient pot file that you can have. So what I did is I researched it a little bit, and I found this package called Gulp WP pot. Funny name, right? So it basically generates your pot files for WordPress localization, like it says here. It's supported. There was a previous version that was abandoned. It uses this other package called Gulp Sort to sort all your strings. And for instance, if you say donate multiple times throughout your plugin, it's going to combine those all into one string so translators don't have to repeat themselves and get annoyed out of their minds. And if you have lots of repeating strings, this can be quite useful. I already mentioned, it's a lot easier than Poet. It's free, and if you're not on WordPress.org and you still are trying to get translations, it's really hard, and most likely you'll have to pay for it. The top leading service for this is called Transifex, and it's not cheap at all, but it'll get you tons of translations quickly. You can see some of the top apps do it. They basically have a network of different language speakers, and they do the same thing basically as WordPress does, except for it's a paid deal, not a volunteer-based deal. What you can do is also use a package, basically, once the file is generated, is to push it to Transfinex. I can't pronounce it. It's really easy. I'll show you how quickly it runs. Well, here's the code quick while I get that set up. How do you zoom in and there we go. You want me to Transifex. There you go. Transifex.com. So this is my Giv's Give file, or Gulp file, excuse me. And you basically don't want this this task running on every build, or on every on the default task that runs. Like when I just run Gulp within this directory, within the main Give directory, you'll see that it basically compiles all my SAS files, and then it starts and concatenates them, and then it starts watching for any changes that I make to the JavaScript or PHP. And if you had the plot file generating every time on this, it's not really necessary, because you only want to generate it when getting ready to release. So you have the latest version, right? It's got all the latest strings within the plot file, and then the translators can take that and update or modify as necessary. All right, cancel this process here. And then what I have here is a separate task, Gulp task, just called pot. And you give it a couple options here. What's your package name? It's generally the same as your slug. It's just give for us right here, you can see. Give. What's your text domain? Give. If it was gift aid for WooCommerce, that would be the text domain, because on WordPress.org, in order to get accepted into WordPress, your text domain needs to be the same as your plugin slug. For some reason, I have no idea why. It's the way the backend system works. Does everybody know what WordPress is? It's basically volunteer Transfinex. I said that right? But it's all people all over the world, and they speak crazy languages that I have never even heard of. Let me show you for our plugin. So you can see here, here's all the translations we have here, and we got recently a couple more. And if you click on translate this plugin while you're logged in, it will take you to translating, or translate.wordpress.org. The cool people call it WordPress. Basically, you have to get approved by the higher ups in the translation community to submit strings directly. Otherwise, they go into this queue called waiting. And then another translator who speaks the like language will confirm that that's an actual translation. And they're not doing anything malicious like hiding HTML or JavaScript to, basically hack your plugin. Or, do whatever they want. So if you click on any of these little bubbles here, you can actually go into and dig in to see, who's translating what, how many strings they've translated. You can provide notes for them in here. And it's really quite a cool system that just came in place, I think, early last year. And it's great because, like I said, if you're in Japan and you don't really understand English, trying to use a plugin that isn't translated in your language is really difficult. It's like turning on WordPress on a different language and just doing that for a day or so. But some of the language I said here is like, really, who speaks this stuff? Like, there's one called emoji in here, I think. I don't know. Yeah, I was like, is emoji a language?
Can't believe you guys don't speak emoji.
We don't speak Tartar. Sorry. So that's a bit about WordPress. And basically, you want to get your translation files into there, your plugin in there, and start seeing the languages show up on the left sidebar here. Gives you some cred and spreads your plugin throughout. So actually, let me just run this Gulp file task here. And you can see it takes 1.13 seconds. Our plugin has like 1,100 strings or so it's quite a large plugin to do that with. But you know, that 1 second, you don't want that running every time on your default task also. So now that we have a new plot file generated, if I just do a git status, you can see that the file's been updated. Most likely its string's been changed, there's been a period added or something like that. But you can see that generated a new file. If you're a grunt user, fear not, you also have actually a better package to use for translation. We were using Grunt and Gulp and Give, and I was like, stop this insanity. The only reason we were using Grunt was to generate that pot file. And I like it better, to be honest with you. Let me just open it up here. It has many more options. You can get super complex in your configurations. The documentation is better. It's not good, but if you look at this documentation compared to this documentation, it's like, this is next to nothing, and you kind of have to like decipher how to do it properly based off this one example usage. But if you go back to the Grunt pot package on here, you can see there's a number more examples. Well, maybe not that many more, but you do have a whole lot more options to work with here. We do use this on a separate plugin, and I do have an example of that Grunt file here, and I can put this in a gist or something if you guys are interested in that. But basically, you can see it's a little more complex with how exactly it's set up. If you compare the two tasks, this is what, like 10 lines, 11, 12 lines. This one's like, bam, look at all that. Holy. But you can do cool things, like here's an example of how you push to transifex. Get that one day. And here's the actual make pot task. You point it to a directory. Where's it going to put the pot file? The coolest thing is you can exclude subdirectories. So if you're using like CMB2 to generate your options, CMB2 has so many different strings in it that you don't want like polluting your own translation files. You want to limit the strings as much as possible so you can get those translation. It's an easier time for translators to work with. You point it toward the main file. Here's the pot file. You can actually specify the headers in it. You can give it, different emails and support. If a translator has a question, they'll know where to email. And what else here? What else did I like on it? Basically, that's the sum of it. It's kind of nice that it has all those options, and but for what we need, I think the Gulp version works pretty well for us. If you're getting more advanced and you want to do some of that transifex stuff, then that's the way to go. Anybody have any questions on any of that? We're all going to go translate everything now, right?
I'm curious what CMB2 actually puts in there that's other than that.
A lot. Let me see if I have an example here.
And how do you overcome that?
Basically, you exclude that directory. And if you don't have the option to exclude it, you remove all the localization files that it includes, which bloat up your plugin anyways. So if I go to CMB2's GitHub and I look into their languages folder here, look at all these language files that are in here. like a jillion files. And if you're including all those in your plugin, it's a lot of data. And if then all this, let's see how large it is actually.
What's the idea behind that?
Well, you don't really want to use the strings from other plugins as a best practice. If you did include it and you included all those like PO and MO files that they have there, then if you did use a string, it would actually most likely, I think, show in that language. But then you're going to have some strings in a certain language and some strings in another language. And I think that can be just as annoying for as a best practice. You know, that's why on WordPress, WordPress.org, they don't say that your plugin supports another language until it's 95% translated. So if you're 50-50 or whatever, then it's not good practice. Here's an example of how they use a string, field description optional, several times throughout the plugin. And this is what basically sorts it here. But you can see that they don't really have that many strings, but you know, do you really want like web dev studios in there and stuff like that? Not really. Not if you're trying to be the next WooCommerce. We all are, right?
Oh, yeah.
Keep the text domain the same as the plugin slug. It's a requirement if you want on WordPress. Don't use variables for your text domain. That's really hard for these to read. So if you have a variable in a class with your text domain, or you're calling it in a singleton pattern or something like that, and you're just referencing that variable within your strings, your translation strings, then it's not good practice. Just type it out. It's fine. Provide descriptive notes to for any type of wildcards or complex translations. If it's like address with some sort of wildcard, provide like, this is the address to the user's home or the donor's home. So they know like, oh, you're talking about it in this context. I know how to translate it in that context that you're talking about. Limit strings as much as possible. Make it easier for translators. If there's 3,000 different strings, it's going to take a whole long time for the volunteers to get through that. And it's going to cost a lot of money on transifex, which I think is per word. So, which of an arrow? Reuse strings as much as possible. And don't, you know, a lot of people include their documentation within their plugin, which is okay, I guess, for some certain extent, but link off to your site where the documentation is at. And still provide some help and some tips, but don't write long manuals in there. Not really the best practice, I don't think. And then don't put strings in JavaScript. Use WP localized script, pass it from your PHP into your JavaScript via an object. And finally, we went over this. Don't use translation files within dependencies like CMD2 or whatever. Has anybody used Butterbean yet? No? It's the coolest thing on the street. I have to show you now. It's a new framework, guys. It's called Butterbean. Does anybody know who Butterbean is, the fighter guy? Oh, I gotta show you this now. This guy's hilarious. Boom. Butterbean. But anyways, it's got, and it's a really cool way to think about a framework. Personally, CMB2 creates a meta box nightmare, and this is an interesting way to display meta boxes. By Justin Tadlock. Who follows Justin Tadlock? He's a great guy. Okay, so this is several different meta boxes in a WooCommerce-like setup that you can basically tab through. It's tabbed meta boxes with backbone, so it's super fast for the fields. Where can I see that?
Is it like production ready?
Yeah, it just got out of beta. It was written up on WP Tavern. And
how does it hold up to like ACF?
So the biggest drawback is there's no repeater field. whatever, I can't find the demo. If you Google better than I can, then it's there. It basically shows you can click on the fields and see it firsthand. It's kind of cool.
hybrid.com/plugin/butterbean.
There you go. Okay, without taking up too much time, I'm going to just quickly jump through right to left compatibility. One cool plugin that I use to check compatibility is called WPRTL. It's pretty handy. It will give you a headache though if you leave it on too long and you're not used to it. I better have this installed, right? Okay, I did have it installed. All right, I missed it here. So here it is, right here. It has this little link in the top left here. It says switch to RTL. Boom, switch, and there's WordPress in RTL. And what you do to test your compatibility is you basically just go through your plugin. Okay, that looks good. Usually, if it's in the admin, you're using a proper, admin interface, it will look fine, right? If these fields were all on the left here, that's a red flag. But, this is acceptable. It's really on the front end where you have to be conscious of how things are functioning. So you can see here, before we were compatible, this was right over here, which is fine because the theme, this is 2012, handles that. But all this other stuff was pushed to the left. And if you're in a different language, it's not acceptable for them. Before we were automating this, we basically had a separate RTL SAS file for compatibility, and we were manually, by hand, changing float left, float right, display, whatever position property we were using manually by hand, and this got very tedious. And this developer working was like, that's not a good way moving forward. You're wasting lots of time, and it's not really, future-proof. So you're always going to miss something, and why don't you automate that? I was like, wow, you can automate that? And lo and behold, you can. So the package that we use, let me just close some of these tabs here. Not that one. Yada, yada, yada. All right, here it is. Gulp RTL CSS. Gulp plugin that uses RTL CSS to convert left to right CSS to right to left. So basically, this plugin uses another dependency, which is this RTL CSS, which has a website, and you can read about all how it works. And here's the property, or here's all the CSS3 that it's compatible with, and it explains how it works and stuff. But you don't have to do that because it's simple to set up. All you do is basically, let me go back to where we're using it in Give. Set your package right here, RTL CSS, call it right there, put it in your packages.json file. So when you're npm installing, it'll install. And then when you generate your SAS files, when you generate your CSS from your SAS files, here you can see we run SAS right here. Then we run RTL CSS, rename it using the rename package to give-admin RTL.css, put it in a different directory, minify it, or rename it again, then minify it, and then also push it to another directory. So it's a fairly simple step process if you understand Gulp and how the different pipes they call them work. And literally, we're not using a single option that they provide. So for a plugin like Give, which is semi-complex, it's really simple to use. And guess what? It works. That's the best part. I was kind of skeptical, but it's great. So I have no complaints. Does anybody have any questions on that at all? You could use this also for your themes and your client builds as well. If you're building a really large client site that needs to be translated in different languages and support that RTL type of functionality, then it's a great package as well. I'm not sure if Grunt has a similar package. I would assume they did. But hey, check that out. Great. It's the same name. I bet you it's the same author too. There's also another one here. See, that's a little more popular than kind of look cool kids. That flips CSS. I think I'm gonna stick with the other one. But yeah, hopefully this will help you when you're all building WooCommerce add-ons or Give add-ons or whatever you want to build, and really stop thinking locally and start thinking globally. Landed right there.
Give is as your plugin before.
Great.
I was going to ask whether we can do that.
Should be good, hopefully. All right, so I am going to be presenting on WooCommerce Extensions 101. Let me take this off too. So yeah, this is on WooCommerce Extensions 101. If anyone wants these slides, I've put them up in real time at Trestian.com/AWP2016. Who am I? Yaron Guez. I'm Director of Technology at Trestian. Actually, hold on. Let me turn on screen share. I just realized this video is just my face. Let's do that. Infinity. All right. We'll go back here. Where is the button go? I'm losing my mind with the. There it is. Okay. Tim, are you still watching on YouTube? Yeah. It's working? Great, thank you. Okay, so the viewers are home, Trestian.com/AWP2016. So yeah, Yaron Guez, I'm Director of Technology of a company called Trestian. We are a San Diego-based software and web development agency. You can email me at Yaron@Trestian, find me on Twitter at Yaron Guez, but I pretty much only use Twitter to yell at companies when they do something wrong. I don't really get it. LinkedIn, GitHub, all that good stuff. I also have a startup, a non-WordPress related startup called Crypteron, which is instant data security for backend applications, the Java and C# type thing. If you dabble in that, check it out. So we're going to go over WooCommerce Extensions 101. Basically, I broke this into 4 chapters: developer tools, best practices, resources, and examples. But really, it's only going to be one example. And we'll see if we have time for that. But first, what is a WooCommerce extension? Spoiler alert, it's just a WordPress plugin. So most of this presentation will really just be on building WordPress plugins. I mean, there's going to be a fair amount of WooCommerce specialties, but WooCommerce is just a really big and complicated WordPress plugin that for the most part is done really well. Some legacy badness in there, but you can learn a lot from looking at its code. So chapter 1, some developer tools. First thing first, PHP Storm with WordPress integration. You know, big boy and girl developers need an IDE and not a text editor. Sorry, Sublime. As I mentioned, WooCommerce is huge, and sometimes to find what you need will take some detective work. The tools in PHP Storm are essential for figuring out what you need to do. For example, IntelliSense, code completion. Don't expect to memorize all the different WooCommerce helper functions and hooks. Debugging, being able to step through your code when it's not working. Code navigation, being able to drill in and on a function say, show me the code for that function. Spotlight style instant search for a symbol or file, also really huge. And by Spotlight, I mean that, you know, when you hit Command Shift O, you can instantly just start typing and jump to a file. Command Option Shift O, you can start typing and jump to a variable, a function, a class, whatever you want. Really useful. WordPress integration allows you to go from hooks to the callbacks and back and forth again. I'll show you what I mean in a bit. And error detection, the little squiggly line under things will catch things well before you do. It's really intelligent at telling you you did something wrong. So when you install WordPress integration with PHP Storm, which is just a checkbox in the project settings, it will automatically index all the hooks. Those include the core hooks, WooCommerce hooks, and any custom hooks you define or plugins for code completion. So for example, as you do add action, it will have all these different great actions ready for you to choose. Likewise, when you do add action or add filter, it will link that to where they are invoked. So for example, if we have an add action, add menu example, post menu, you see that little symbol there. When you click on it, it shows you that that is executed in menued PHP. You can click on it and it'll even take you there. Do action, add the menu. This is enormous. And when working with WooCommerce, WooCommerce is all about the hooks. They have a lot of script files that they have are nothing but do actions in a row. So being able to dive in, and WooCommerce extensions, of course, also use these sort of hooks. So by able to dive in, you'll be able to keep your breath. It also intelligently determines callback functions for navigation. So here we have add action. We just showed you where admin menu was invoked. But what about the callback? You know, it knows that example post menu is not just a string, it is a function. So if you drill into that, command click or command B on it, it will take you to the actual method function that is being called. Again, incredibly useful. Here's the navigate the symbols for hooks as well. So it's that same spotlight level search. It doesn't just work on classes and functions, it will work on hooks as well. So you can go and find where these hooks are created just by typing. Next super helpful tool is Kint Debugger. It is var dump on steroids. It will let you drill into arrays or objects really easily with that plus to expand. It will parse multiple data types. You can see in this example, it's parsing a time, it's parsing a string, it's parsing a tabular array, it's parsing XML. It'll show you in a very easy to read way. It also shows the file, line number, and function of the calling code. So you can really, extremely helpful for debugging and figuring out what is going on here. It has a WordPress plugin as well, so you don't have to deal with any custom code. Just install the WordPress plugin, and that will output this stuff to the debugger bar, so it won't make your code look really ugly, or your output. I say this a lot, but I really can't live without this. Next, Simply Show Hooks. This is a plugin that simply shows hooks. When you click the button in the admin bar, it will show all the hooks that are output on the page. can be very noisy. Some of these pages are just like in your face, but so it's kind of a sledgehammer approach to solving a problem, but it gets the job done. If you're really not sure, like, where is this piece of text I'm looking at coming from? It will say, oh, you know, it's this hook. Go back into PHP Storm, look up that hook, you can find it. In terms of WooCommerce, it can be better to just view the template files, because it will be do action, do action, do action. Next, either live reload or grunt or gulp. Point is you want something monitoring your code for changes and doing something. This will compile your Sass, your less, your stylus, CopyScript, whatever. It will also refresh the browser window on change. It will update CSS in real time, so we won't even have to refresh the browser on change, either through a browser bar add-on or just through this JavaScript you can drop in there. If you're not using less or Sass, you should be. It's, you know, CSS is just another programming language, and to write all those things out by hand is a mess. So one of the biggest obstacles to less is having something that compiles it. This just does it for you, really easy. One issue I have with it is that it doesn't, at least work for me on HTTPS. I don't know if you guys have had that problem.
I have that problem with Node in Chrome.
Yeah, so that's an issue because now I'm developing even locally with HTTPS just to mirror the environments properly. Everyone's complaining about it, so hopefully they will get around that. But in the meantime, it's still great for everything but the reloading. Xdebug, this is a debugging tool for Apache. It comes with XAMPP, desktop server, MAMP, you know, most other Apache flavors. It can be a pain to set up. I would recommend the best tutorial on setting it up is at the PHP Storm website because it integrates really nicely with it, but it is so worth the struggle. You know, if you're trying to debug something from a hook, calling another hook that's within an AJAX request, you can't add, you know, Kint or var dump. You're not going to see it. It's in an AJAX request.
One of those buttons on Pressmatic that I love so much is one-click debug connect to PHP Storm. You just click it and boom, it works.
Oh wow,
That's not a thing.
that's great. I just realized the microphone was over here, so let me just put this on. Yeah, and when you need it, you really need it. If something just isn't working and you have no idea why and you're hitting your head against it, you're going to wish that you had set it up when times were good. Here's an example of what it looks like in PHP Storm. It will, up top, you can see highlight the line that you're at. And then it will show you all the variables that exist in the current context and what they are equal to at that point in time. And you can drill into them really nicely. You can add watches, so you can monitor a specific variable over the life cycle. You can just hit step next, step next, step next. Hit different breakpoints to find where the error is. And of course, Firebug or Chrome DevTools, pick your poison. Obvious, but worth mentioning. Chapter 2, best practices. So best thing I can say here is to do things the WooCommerce way. If you're going to be building a WooCommerce extension, you should follow their design patterns. PHP is an extremely opinionated community. There are a lot of ways to do things wrong. That's one of the reasons why a lot of other developers scorn it. So the best way to do it when in doubt and you think, I can think of 10 ways to do this, look at the WooCommerce source code. See how they're doing it. It's not always right, but at least it'll be consistent, and you can learn from them. Download a core WooCommerce add-on, one of the popular ones, see how they do it as well. They have a clearly set way of doing things. A lot of that is described at this link, create a plugin, so I'm just going to take a look at that real quick. So if we just go through this page, we'll see some of the things you're supposed to start with. You know, check if WooCommerce is active. If there's something you need to do, only if WooCommerce is active, this is how you do it. Main file naming. This is just naming conventions, text domains, localization, follow WordPress PHP guidelines, all pretty obvious. Custom database tables and data storage. You know, I agree with this. You should avoid custom data tables at all costs. By going through a custom data table, you're going to skip out on a lot of performance optimizations that WordPress does for you. Most things can fit into a post type, a taxonomy, or an option, especially now that taxonomy terms are first-class citizens and have metadata as well. You know, there's still times when you need to, especially if you're storing like a lot of tabular data like GPS coordinates or things like that sort. There are definitely times when you need to use a table, but just ask yourself, do I need to use a table? Here's a great little mention on the permanence of data and caching. They say if the data may not always be present, for example, expires, use a transient. I'm not going to go too deep on transients. Well, I might go later. It's a really deep topic, but it's worth learning about. The data is persistent but not always present, considering using the WP cache. If the data is persistent and always present, consider the WP options table. If the data is an entity with n units, consider a post type. Sorting categorization is a taxonomy. So yeah, if you are doing something that is not going through the post type standard classes, definitely add caching. I'll show an example of that at some point because it's not going to cache your table lookup every single time for you. They go through using the WC logger class, which is a helpful class too, to basically just add logging if something goes wrong and prevent data leaks. You know, you should be doing this always for all plugins. Just add this at the top of every PHP file. Otherwise, someone can just go directly to that PHP file and start to learn things about how your system is set up. Adding a README, plugin author name, they want credit, which is kind of odd, but whatever. Plugin URI, they talk about using the WordPress and WooCommerce UI. Don't, you know, make your own user interface. Use the existing tools. They talk about using add menu screens when it should be a high-level menu, when it should be a menu that's a subsetting of WooCommerce settings, when it should be a sub-menu of the WooCommerce sidebar. And they just go into the details about this. So that's also worth thinking about of where your menu item is going to be. You know, a sub-menu, a settings menu, a WooCommerce settings tab, for example here. Make it extensible. This is also huge. You want to add, I'm guilty of this because I often, you know, most of the coding I do is client work, so I don't often think about making it extensible because the client can just modify the code. But if it's not, you want to add your own hooks. You should pepper your entire code with do action and apply filters. Just think, would someone might want to do this a little differently? Would someone want to add something to this? And I mean, you can take that to the extreme of WooCommerce. You can build most of your functionality as actions. So you never really even call a function. You just do action, do action, do action. And they reference a great article that Pippin wrote on that concept as well. Remove unused code. If you're using version control, you shouldn't be having to comment stuff you're not using. Just delete it. You can always get it back later. Add comments. We'll go into this a little later with PHP doc blocks. Really, really useful. Avoid God objects. Know or do too much, essentially, with object-oriented programming, which we'll get into a little later. You want to, every class should have a really clear role. And if you have one class that's doing a million things and is massive, it's probably too big. Break it up into smaller classes. Turn on WT debug and make sure you are not adding to the problem. I don't know if you've ever used WordPress with that on, but it's a mess. Separate business logic and presentation logic. So that's a big deal when it comes to PHP. Most PHP is just a presentation. It's just a page, it's a view. It's combining all your different texts with your business logic. You really don't want to do that. In some cases with WordPress, it's unavoidable. Like, for example, the WP query class. If you're doing the standard new WP query while have the posts, like that's going to be business logic. But you can at least assemble the arguments to your query often outside of that view and pass it in. I'll show an example of that in a bit as well. And more on transients, more on logging, UI for service integration plugins. So for example, if you're adding a payment gateway, they talk about that. So great little article. Next, the PHP documenter, PHP doc block. PHP documenter is used to generate documentation from PHP code. WordPress and WooCommerce both use it. PHP Storm inserts it automatically in a lot of places when you make a new class, for example. And PHP Storm parses it to provide very intelligent autocomplete and error detection. For example, say I'm in a template and I have some product, and I do the little arrow, and PHP Storm will say no suggestions. It has no idea what some product is. But if right above that, I add a comment block where I say @var, which is you're basically describing what a variable is, and I say some product is a WC product, all of a sudden PHP Storm knows everything about WC product. So it can have the autocomplete in terms of all the different properties and methods on the WC product. Very helpful and good for people using your code as well. So you can use that within your classes, in your templates, everywhere, if you look up that syntax. Load custom front-end pages with the content. This is my opinion. So basically, theme developers, if they want to add a custom front-end page, they will use a page template. Plugin developers cannot do that. You can't drop a page template in someone's theme. So you have three options. You can do short codes, where the user will add a short code to output your functionality, your custom page. You can hook into template redirect, where basically you say, hey, don't load your template, use my template. Or you can selectively filter on the content. WordPress uses number 1 for custom pages like the cart, where you'll have a WooCommerce shortcode for the cart. They use number 2 for custom post types. So for example, single product. They are defining the custom post type of product. So when WordPress needs to load a template for product, they hook into that and say, hey, use us. But they at least do it intelligently, where they let the theme developers override that. They'll check, does the theme already have a single product PHP file? Use that. If not, use the one that comes with the plugin. I like to use number 3, filtering on the content. I'll show an example. The reason I like that is you don't have to remember custom shortcodes or put the onus on the end user to say, hey, put this custom shortcode here and know what it is. WooCommerce does that with a setup wizard. Well, they'll say, hey, what is your cart page? And they'll add it for you. But with the filtering on the content, you have to store the page ID somewhere. So you'll need to have an options view where you'll say, hey, which of this drop-down menu is your shopping cart? But WooCommerce does that anyways, because they have to enqueue some scripts on there and do HTTPS redirects and stuff like that. So if you're already storing the page ID, I don't see the point of also requiring them to put a shortcode onto that page to display it. You can just basically hook into the content. I'll show you what I mean. So here we have an add to filter, and I say, hey, on the content on my bookings class, call appointments page content. And then the appointments page content just says, hey, is this page the appointments page? I set that variable up in my constructor, fetching it from the options table. And if so, I basically append to that content. You can see some other best practices that I'm using here. For example, I am passing in a variable of data that my view needs to know about. I don't want my view to have access to every single variable I'm using. If I just called require or include on this page and included in my template file, it would know everything. I just want my template to have a nice well-scoped of what it needs to know. So I made my own GC load template, but you can use WooCommerce's own, I'll show that next, WC get template. And passing in data as an array of what this view needs to know about. I want them to have an array of success message, error message, an edit URL, a vendor, these different things that are important to it. I then do OB start, fetch the template, OB get clean, and then I append that template to the content. Now, when you're on the appointment page, you will see this template loaded. I really should have made my own GC Word load template file, so I'm just going to show you what you should use. This is the WC get template file. It has a few other extra things in here. So for starters, it takes the template name. It takes the array of arguments that you want to pass to your template. It takes the path of where the template should be, and it takes a default path if that template is not found. First thing it does is calls extract on the array of arguments. What that will do is take an array and basically take all the elements of that array and put it into the scope. So now your template knows about those elements in that array as native things. So if we jump back up to my previous method here, they don't have to say data edit URL, data success. They can just say $success, $error, $edit URL. Here it's doing a locate template, so this method will see if that template exists in the theme file folder. If not, it will use the one in where you're telling it should be. Do some error handling. It will let them, third-party plugins, override that template. And then it will call a method before template part, hook, and after, and then it will load it. So the advantage of all this is now if you look, for example, here, if I said booking form equals new booking form, and then I pass that as booking form as an array to this method, and the booking.php file, we can now just refer to booking form. And any other of these variables above there, it wouldn't know about. Keeps your templates clean. This is kind of like the MVC paradigm, sort of. This is your presentation layer. This is your controller. This data array is your model, for those familiar with MVC. I think this is the same. I think I just copied this twice by accident. Yeah. Allow theme authors to override your templates. That's what we were just talking about. Now, in theory, your templates should work in any theme. You should really avoid, adding like Bootstrap classes, assuming that they don't have Bootstrap or whatever. You should really make it as specific. Avoid conflicts. Make it agnostic. And in theory, if theme authors wanted to modify your template, they should do it with hooks. They should say, I want this to happen before here. I want to filter this. Of course, you have to add those hooks to your code so that they can use them. But if all else fails, you do want to allow your theme authors to override your templates, using that previous example I just showed. You can get things out of sync. I don't know about how many of you guys have clients with WooCommerce in an old theme, and it's like your theme files are out of date, and you have to deal with all that. And at least want to give that option. Object-oriented design. You really want to get a handle on that. If it's something that has scared you in the past, I really just recommend spending an afternoon reading up on some tutorials. There's some great books on it. It opens up a whole world. You want to separate all of your logic into different classes. You also want to know when to use static methods versus namespace methods. So for example, in your functions PHP file, those are global functions. You can call them anywhere, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, as opposed to if you have a static method, it's more self-contained, but you have more syntax to call. So WooCommerce does a hybrid approach, where, for example, if you have a function plugin name underscore some helper function, and that calls the plugin name helper class, I call it plugin name foo, some helper function on that. That way, you get the best of both worlds. You get the encapsulation of object-oriented design, but you can at least call it from anywhere in your theme or wherever really easily. A lot of theme developers can be intimidated by having to call a static class. You can see WooCommerce used to do it this way. It used to just make it purely static, and you'd have to know to call WC whatever, : whatever, and they recognize. Just make it easy for the consumer. I want to look at WC product. It's an abstract class to get some concepts of object-oriented design. So the magic of WC product. Here you can see this is the WC product class. This is the core class that all the other products inherit from. And you can see here your PHP doc blocks. They're defining everything about this class, what it is, its different variables that it has, its different properties. So if we just take a look down, you can see it's storing an ID, which is a var, it's an int. And it actually, what it does is it stores the post data as a property of the product. That is a concept called composition over, what the heck? Hold on. I hate the full screen. There we go. Composition over inheritance is a great article on Wikipedia on it. Basically, you can have inheritance such as where a simple product will extend the product, or you can have composition where a product is made up of something else. So here, a product is made up of a post, but the two can go back and forth. You know, for example, if we look at WC get product, uses a product factory. I'm not going to get into the factory pattern, but that's something to know. Let's just keep diving in and diving in. And say that you pass in an ID, it will get a post for that product. You know, every product is associated with a post. And you can see this whole logic of instance of WP post. That's another great technique. And then it will eventually convert that from a post object into a product object. So that's just one way of doing things. Not necessarily a right way or wrong way. It's just you need to use the right way for that syntax, whether to use inheritance or composition. You know, if we look at the ones in extend this, so if I right-click this and say find usage, another great feature, we can see usage and extend clause. We can see what things inherit from this. And sure enough, here's a simple product that extends it. It takes a WC product and adds some more functionality specific to a simple product. So you can spend a lot of time just digging through this code and seeing how they do it. It's really, it's well designed. It's a great way to learn. You can see all these different places where it's invoked, where it's called. I recommend it. What is there we go. Using caching. So this is kind of a hairy topic. I had spent another presentation on this, just on this topic of intelligent transient caching. And invalidation schemes, you know, so transients can expire on their own, or you can remove them. But sometimes you want to remove a whole group of them all at once. So if we look at an example, here's a URL where they go through the logic. But here's an example they call, you know, using an MD5 hash. This is where they're saying that a customer bought a product, and they're going to actually fetch something from the database. Because they're fetching something from the database, they want to cache that query in the transients. But they need to know when the results of this query should expire. So rather than having to keep track of, you know, what is this doing? It's asking for customer email, a user ID, and a product ID. Rather than keeping track of that three combination, the user email, the user ID, and the product ID, and knowing when to expire it, they create a grouping around that based on all the orders. So they do an MD5 hash, which is basically going to take these three elements and combine it into something unique. And they build a cache around that element. So this string here, this WC_CBP stands for customer bought product, and then this unique string representation that comes from customer ID, user ID, and this group will be something that's cached, so it allows you to easily clear that whole cache at once, rather than doing it for a specific product. So I can show you, for example, in the that method get transient version. Here they're basically allowing you to delete that whole grouping at once. So this would be done, for example, if a new order came in. So anytime a customer creates a new order, it can easily go and say, hey, invalidate all the orders for that customer, and this caching for this query would break. So the next time it needs to run, it'll hit the database again. Obviously, it's a really complicated method, so if you're interested in that, I just recommend reading that article. It's a good thing to use if you're writing custom database queries. Use WP error for control flow. WP error is a really helpful class for basically representing that something went wrong and allowing you to ebb and flow around that situation. So if something goes wrong in your method, don't just fail, don't return a 0, return a WP error. Conversely, when you're calling that method, check if the result is an error and handle it accordingly. So here's an example. This is a method I wrote called get service request for vendor. Basically, it takes a vendor and fetches all the service requests that were made for it. So when I do this call here, where is it? The first thing I do is I check to see if the vendor is an object, a vendor object. If it's not, I call the WordPress helper function get vendor, assuming it's a vendor ID. If that comes back as false, that means whatever vendor the person passed me was invalid. So rather than just returning 0 or failing, I return a WP error object. And I say new WP error. You can give it a code so you can really handle around those codes, and then a helpful string. Like the code is invalid vendor, the string is invalid vendor provided. And if you look at the bottom here, oops, where I call this code, we have, I'm calling request manager get service request for vendor, and then I say if the result is a WP error, so is WP error the result that came back, I can now do something. I know something went wrong. And because all of my views have an error variable that will output an error if something went wrong, all I have to do here is pass that to my view. I say error equals, and then because it's a WP error, I can say get error message. This is another case where PHP Storm really comes in handy, because PHP Storm, as you can see at the top here, I give the syntax for what this thing will return. I give the signature rather. I say this function will either return a WP error object or an array. So PHP Storm knows it's one of those two things. So at this point, when I say a little arrow, it's going to suggest to me get error message. Now I can now give that error message to my view and output an error message. If there are multiple different types of error messages and I want to handle them accordingly, I could do that based around the error code here. Invalid vendor, do this. I don't know, bad cache, do that, whatever. So it's a great way to handle flow. Chapter 3, just some helpful resources. How are we doing on time? The WooCommerce class reference is very helpful. It's a high-level overview of the various WooCommerce classes that are out there and what they do. But of course, the best thing is to just look at the source code. Just dive in. I mean, trying to solve a complicated problem, WooCommerce is the best way to learn about WooCommerce. If we look at that real quick, though, we can see it's, it describes WC query, WC customer, tells you where they're stored, tells you how to fetch them, how to get the customer, or get the customer's country. Good thing to look through. Where did my thing go? The WooCommerce API documentation, because they're using PHP doc blocks, it can automatically generate all this great documentation. Tells you everything you need to know. All the different packages, all the different classes. Abstract order tells you what they, a summary of all the methods. But again, this is just coming from source code. This is coming from that doc block syntax. It knows that this is an integer, an object. So you can get the same level of information just by looking at the source code, but this is obviously formatted it a lot nicely. And if you're using that doc block syntax in your own plugins, you can get this great interface as well to give to third-party developers. A great section of that is the hooks documentation. So if we look up top here and click on hook reference, you can see all the crazy amount of hooks that WooCommerce has. It's insane. There's so many of them. As well as it'll even take you directly to the source code in GitHub. I mean, it's great. But I've said it before, you can get that through PHP Storm as well. The WordPress plugin boilerplate is a great way to get a running start on building your plugin. If you go to wppb.io, you answer some questions, and it will generate a plugin for you that you can go and run. Note though, there was an aspect of this project that always bothered me about the way they did loaded actions and filters non-standard. I just forked it, did it a different way, contacted the author, Devin, Vincent, and we're emailing back and forth about perhaps merging it. So this might change considerably in the next week or so. But it's still good. Let me just look at my fork instead. PHP storm lookup again. Search for symbols of the form WC space get. So for example, if we just do the shortcut for enter symbol name, type in WC get, you can see all these different really helpful functions. Get account downloads column, get account endpoint URL, get cart URL. A lot of things out there for fetching an actual specific element within the WooCommerce namespace. Same thing for files of the form WC functions, because they use that helper function syntax of wrapping up their static class methods. If you just do open up files WC functions, you can see all of those in one space. So my last section was to show an example. I think I can run through it. I do want to save time for networking and things of that sort. Well, before I go into an example, is there any questions on the stuff I've covered thus far? I know it's a lot of information. Yes?
I've always heard extract is a bad word. Like, if you extract an array and it creates variables for it, how do you still get that same type of, like PHP storm always complains that says this variable hasn't been declared when you use it?
Var, that same PHP doc block is a cool way to do it. So, great question. So, for example, where I'm in the file where I'm calling extract, I don't care about those variables. It's actually the template file that I'm loading. So, for example, because the place I'm calling the extract is just the load template. In fact, I'm not even doing it. WooCommerce is. Where is it? Load template. There it is. So here, WC get template. The first thing it calls here is extract args. It's not using any of the args in this. In fact, it doesn't know what they are. It's in the template itself. So if you go into one of these template files, so let me say, for example, I went to content dashboard. Here's one of my template files where things are loaded. So for example, let's pick something that is a class, where it doesn't know what it is. Vendor. Vendor's in here somewhere, right here. It doesn't know what vendor is. So same thing like you were saying before, vendor is not defined or whatever. No suggestions. So you just put in front of it that syntax. You start, this at var vendor, and you tell it what it is. Kind of a lousy example because vendor is just a standard object, standard class. But if it was instead, I don't know, like I said, a product, for example, or product booking, now it will have all these different things about it. So you just basically have to tell PHP Storm what to expect. And that is kind of the standard of the MVC, where you don't, it's not going to know out of the box what these sort of things are. Whether you're using Laravel, CodeIgniter, or whatever, you basically have to give it these hints to get around that. Does anyone else want to present on something tonight? A lightning talk in 10, 15 minutes?
I could talk about that security using CloudFlare, if anyone has an interest in that.
Sure.
5 minutes, real quick.
Okay. Anyone else in addition? Don't be shy. Okay. In that case, I am going to spend just a couple more minutes and show you a real-world example. So in my plugin, I needed to add additional
times to a booking. I was actually extending the WooCommerce extension, the WooCommerce bookings extension. I wanted you to be able to choose multiple times and have those times both show up in the cart and show up in the back end. Now, I'm not going to go too far into how I got them to show up and to select them because that was really complicated. But to show you once those fields were passed in, how they were saved, I can show you that. So if we look at this, for an example, add additional times is where I call, if fields, basically it takes in fields, and if these additional times are set, it appends to them. And you can see where is this called. So if I just say find usages, I can see there's a filter called booking form fields because they basically are storing what the form fields are saved for the booking, and I can add to that. Same thing here. They call something called WooCommerce new booking. You can see where this is invoked and where I'm using it. So new booking, if I see where this is invoked, I can see right after they have a new booking function that takes in the status, creates a new booking, and it's basically parsing out all this order data, and then at the end of it, it calls the method do action WooCommerce booking new booking and passes in the booking ID. So if I go back to this, you can see I call, when that gets called, I call my save additional times in DB. If I can command B on that, I can see where I load the post metadata because I know booking ID is just a post ID. So I load the metadata about that and I add my additional metadata, these additional times. Same thing here to show that in the cart. You need to save additional times in cart. There's something WooCommerce add cart item data, save additional times in cart. The point is, I didn't know how to do any of this. Some of these things you can't really Google because other people haven't necessarily asked those questions or done. But with all these tools that I've shown you and the kind of detective work of diving through and finding where the life cycle of what happens and using these invocation points and going back and forth and debugging, because for example, when you use an add filter or a add action where they're passing you an argument, you don't necessarily know what that argument is. But when you do a debugging and you put a breakpoint there, you can inspect it and say, oh, okay, this is what they're giving me. This is what this class has. How can I use it? And how can I think creatively and try to solve that problem? And it's cool. It's a lot of fun. And you feel like you're a detective. I'm going to wrap it up on that and invite Jim. Thank you. Can you use my computer? Great. There we go.
Yes, hello there. My name is Jim Walker. I'm with HackRepair.com, and my thing is website security. So if your website's been compromised, or you think it's been compromised, or you have any security questions, just give me a call. You can usually find me at HackRepair.com. My phone number's on there, email address, everything. Well, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about security in your website. And who's heard of CloudFlare? Who uses CloudFlare? Okay, so only a few people. But CloudFlare is provided free for virtually every hosting company around. You can actually go and click a button and normally have it set up. There's really no downside to using it. So I recommend that if you have a busy website that you really consider using it or one of the other services. But I'm just going to talk about CloudFlare real quick. And I'm going to focus on only two things, and that really is an anti-denial service problem. Have any of you been attacked with a denial of service, or your website's been overwhelmed with traffic or anything of that nature? Well, the nice thing about the CloudFlare service is it gives you a couple options to mitigate the problem of that attack, which is your site slowing down or maybe your service provider turning you off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly log into CloudFlare and just to show you a couple things of how easy it is for you to manage a situation that you might think is not manageable. Because what is a denial of service attack? I mean, it really is just a lot of traffic going to your website and doing a lot of bad things. Now, the thing about a denial of service attack is that there is no preventative measure, okay? There is no preventative measure. And for people who believe that you can get a $10,000 firewall appliance and put it in front of your server, it's not true. Because there are many different ways a denial of service attack can happen. And really, the only way that you're going to help reduce the impact is to go with a cloud-based service. It's going to be a CloudFlare or any of the other services, because they have not just the bandwidth, but they have just the distributed ability to reduce the impact of that attack. And how CloudFlare does it is they give you a couple of options, and I'm going to show them to you real quick. When you first log into CloudFlare, you'll see something like this, and you'll get all these nice symbols along the top. But truthfully, as you click through most of them, you only see that a couple of them are really useful. So if you're going to use CloudFlare to help minimize an attack, it's very easy. You have to look at two things. But before I get into those two things, I'm going to talk briefly about page rules. I'm not going to give you any real big examples, but I'm just going to kind of give you a statement that page rules are really important. And if you're going to use Cloudflare, you should take a look at the thing called page rules. Now, in my case, I only have one page rule here, and it just simply says that all traffic that goes to HTTP : is redirected to HTTPS. You would think, but I could do that in WordPress. I can do that with an htaccess rule. Well, you can, but why take the chance? Just Cloudflare, boom, one line of text, and you redirect everything from HTTP to HTTPS. You don't have to worry about having an accidental link within your website that redirects to HTTP. Just Cloudflare is going to do it for you. So I don't even think about that. When I work with a client site and I'm securing their site. Yes, sir? It's free. Everything I'm going to talk about today is free. And this will only be 5 minutes, so it's not very long. So this is one feature that gives you the ability to control the way in which your URL redirects. And this is a simple one. I recommend everyone do this. If you don't have SSL on your website, you should have got it yesterday. All right. There's no reason not to have it. It's free in most cases. And if it's not free, it's such a small cost that it's just not even worth talking about it. You need to do it, not just for the security advantage, but also for the SEO advantage. That's a different discussion. But let me talk about the one thing I was going to mention real quick, and that is within Cloudflare, you have this thing called firewall. Now, when you set up with Cloudflare, which by the way is free, right? There is a $20 version, there is a $200 version, but most of us are just going to set up the free version. And all the free version of Cloudflare does is it's like a proxy service. It allows all the traffic to go through them, and then it goes to you. It filters through them, and then it goes down to your website. And essentially, when you sign up with Cloudflare, you start with a medium website security level. And the reason why I'm actually talking is because I have many clients who have been attacked. And I'm going to tell you right now how to mitigate it significantly to the point where you're still in business and you're not out of business and your hosting company isn't asking you to move. And that is a reality. I've seen it many times. Within this firewall area of Cloudflare, you'll see something that says, I'm under attack. So I just clicked it. It's on now. That's it. There's nothing more to it. Now what happens is that if my website is under a denial of service attack at this very moment, they will be hit with either some sort of screen will pop up saying, fill out a CAPTCHA or something to that effect. And legitimate traffic will get through, but you might have to wait a few seconds. For example, you'll go to the website and it may bring up a screen that says, we're checking your connection, 1001, 1002, 1003, and then you'll get through. It'll be like a delayed connection. And that'll help reduce a lot of the slamming of the denial of service attacks, lots of IP addresses hitting your website. So that's a really trivial one, and that gives you this sort of short-term benefit in that you can still get legitimate traffic in, but it's at least not bringing the web server down. And of course, if you're on a shared web server, you're probably bringing down all the 500 other websites that are on that shared server. So you're doing not only yourself a benefit, but you're also doing your neighbors on that server a benefit because you're reducing the impact of your website being attacked. So as simple as that, I'm now going to send it back to Medium. And it does it in real time. I'm not going to show you what it looks like, but what happens is when it's under attack, it just brings up a page. It's annoying, but legitimate people are going to say, yeah, but I still want to read your content. They're going to wait a couple seconds and they're going to get through. One other thing that's really cool, and is if you scroll down on the same, again, we're only talking about one thing, and that's firewall. If you scroll down on it, you'll see something that talks about access rules. And access rules are really cool. So in the same scenario, your website's being attacked by a whole 1,000 IP addresses per hour from the Ukraine. Happens. I've seen it happen. Only from a specific country, maybe the Philippines, maybe Russia. Well, you can actually enter in the name of the country you want to block. For example, I'm just going to type in RU. I'm just going to choose one at random. I'm just going to type in Cyprus. So I'm going to block the country of Cyprus. Now, with the free version of CloudFlare, you don't actually get to block it. But what you do, because watch what will happen if you try it. It will actually say something at the bottom. Well, it's actually not saying something at the bottom I would expect, but in theory, you're not actually able to block that country. What will happen is it'll bring up a message that says you can't block it, but you can do a CAPTCHA. So I would say that if you're going to be blocking a country, someone is attacking you, just go direct to a CAPTCHA or a JavaScript challenge. And that will happen is that anyone from that country, if you scroll down, whoops, it'll actually say down there, Cyprus, connecting to this website will get a CAPTCHA. Now what that means is that there may be legitimate people in Cyprus trying to connect to your website. They'll still be able to get to it, except they'll have to type in a phrase or a letter or number or something like that. So that is it. Those are two little things you can do with Cloudflare in seconds to help minimize a denial of service attack. Yes, sir?
Are you cutting the server lock?
Yeah. Right. So what will happen more often than not is that you have already put in place a security plugin. And that security plugin or your hosting company are going to very aggressively tell you, you get 1 million IP connections from Russia or IP connections from some bot or something of that sort. If a hosting company is really smart, they'll be able to tell you exactly it's predominantly from X country. And most denial of service attacks are distributed in a sense that many of the connections are from one place and another. But in virtually every single case that I've ever seen where there's denial of service attack, 3/4 or more of the IPs are from a particular area or region. So if you know they're from the Ukraine, Russia, somewhere like that, you can block a bunch of them and basically mitigate the problem almost down to nothing and not affect your regular users. So you can use either the firewall higher security level setting to kind of put a delay on the IP connections, or you can go right to the access rules and block the IP and or put a CAPTCHA up for the countries, which I personally prefer. I generally don't block. I generally don't put myself under the high attack. I always start with the access rules, because if it's from the Ukraine, which is a favorite of mine for some reason, or they like my website for some reason, I'll just put a block for Ukraine, and then it'll just bring up a CAPTCHA, and then all of a sudden the server will come back alive. It's really interesting how that works. Now, could your hosting company have done that, or could that have been done at the level of your server? Almost never. Because the problem is that denial of service attacks are saturation. They're not bandwidth. So anyone tells you that you ran out of bandwidth, no. They're almost always saturation attacks, which means that if your server only allows a 100 gigabit per second connection, which a lot of shared hosting servers have, then once they hit that 100 gigabit per second, they saturate your port and you're out of business. Okay, so that's the reason why you want to have a third-party external denial of service company or something like this that allows you to block traffic in an external way. You don't want to be trying to block traffic at your server. That's just a mistake, because it's almost never going to work, except for low-level bot protection. You all know I have a HackRepair bad bot thing that I've been working on for like a decade. It's wonderful. It's like a per website thing, and it reduces the bot traffic on your website. And I use it for a variety of reasons, but it's not really a denial of service tool, because nowadays denial of service is not at the level of bots. and the individual attack. It's at the saturation level, which is way above your server and needs to be mitigated above the server. So there you go. Yes, Devin?
Are there any sort of weekly reports or reporting in here about like what is locked, whether it's not service or they're trying to hit your WP login page? Or?
Actually, yeah, I didn't want to go into that, but you do have analytics and you do have an overview, and the analytics will actually show you how much bandwidth, and it'll actually show you threats. So you can actually go into, and it'll show you, on today I had 125 threats, and it'll actually kind of describe that they were bad browser connections, or maybe they were a bot, generally speaking, some odd bot with an odd name that no one's ever heard about, which is fairly common. So yes, and also most of the country connections that I had were potential threats for in the US. So
what's the difference between this and security firewall?
Security firewall is a web application firewall, which is a level above Cloudflare. Cloudflare does have a business plan, or should I say in the pro version, you do get a low-level web application firewall. And in that $20 plan, it does give you the ability to, web application firewall essentially is something that smartly identifies certain types of attacks and blocks them. Cloudflare at that level is more of an IP sort of management system, whereas an web application firewall is more like it sees that you're using WordPress, and it sees certain types of attacks that have been scripted to attack WordPress, and it's smart enough to know to block those types of attacks. So both Security and Cloudflare are going to be beneficial in that. Security probably more so because they're really focused on what they do. Cloudflare, you know, they're distributed. They're trying to sell their services, and they're trying to sell the web application firewall. I would say that web application firewall is not something you get with Cloudflare. You would have to pay more for that.
Their web application firewall option does have a WordPress.
It does.
But it,
yeah. You have to pay for it.
Today, like, or they used to charge you for the SSL features, that was the site, and then I use that web firewall. But the moment they gave you SSL for free,
right. So a lot of people don't know that, but a lot of people still don't use Cloudflare because they think they charge for SSL. So that's
even like hosting companies.
Yeah.
Like I've been talking with chat before, and they're like, oh, well, I see you're on Cloudflare free plan, so
right.
that's not going to work for you. Like,
right.
Not like a year.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know that yet. And you can educate your clients on it because it's usually fairly trivial to set up. Yes, sir?
Does Cloudflare still require you to be their main server?
Yes, because they're at a level before your server. So you wouldn't want to use your hosting company's name servers because that kind of defeats the purpose. You're going through their name servers, which that in theory, there's a theory to this, that in theory prevents the bots from knowing your IP address and being able to attack it directly. Truth of the matter, they can figure out your IP address in a lot of other ways. Cloudflare is not a perfect solution, but it's a whole lot better than what you have at the shared hosting level.
Also, if you want to have your domain registrar, your DNS provider, and your server hosting separate companies, separate places, it's just distributing you don't have all your eggs in a basket.
Yeah.
One of them goes down, one of them gets hacked, or separate places. Most registrars, but have awful DNS providers.
Right.
They don't have, for hours for it to update and bad interface. Cloudflare is amazing DNS. Update. I mean, once the name server has been updated, if you go and say, hey, I now want this subdomain to go to this IP address, it happens. Really good interface.
So what he's saying is that Cloudflare, again, is an example of a third-party service that it's not using your hosting company's service, which may or may not be so great. And the advantage of Cloudflare is because they really are built to do that at scale. Whereas even a small hosting company or mid-sized hosting company, truthfully, their name servers are probably the least secured aspect of the business. They tend not to be the highest end hardware for various reasons. So by putting your DNS service behind someone of Cloudflare's level or someone other, you're getting the advantage of that's what they do for a living, that scalability. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, my pleasure. We still look forward to another have some trash bags and second bags for your trash in there, that would be great. Community is our great sponsor. Also, if you don't mind tweeting at them, posting on Facebook, be like, thank you. It's really cool that let us use the space. Yeah, thanks. See you next month. Thank you.
We have to think of talk about like this, and if there's someone who wants to come right yeah, that place is cool. Sure, I had no reason with it.